Okay, so we're going to talk about possibly the most, not possibly, definitely the most complex lens that we're going to talk about this semester. So we're going to be talking about deconstruction. Now, I am by no means an expert on deconstruction. It is a vast lens that has a lot of different components and ins and outs and yada, yada, yada. I'm just giving you a crash course. So, with that being said, I'm going to try to walk you through these three poems, and I'm not going to go through as thoroughly as a deconstructionist would. I'm just trying to give you a glimpse into how this might work. Okay, keep in mind that deconstruction is an answer to formalism. Formalism takes a deep dive into the meaning of a poem by looking at every single word and saying, what do these words mean and how are they playing together to create an overall meaning? Deconstructionists take that same idea, but they take it one step further and they say basically, yeah, let's look at these individual words and look at the intended meaning of them by the author. But here's the problem. I'm not the author. You're not the author. And in all likelihood, the author to these things is long dead, as is the case with all three of these poems. So, how on earth are we supposed to know what the author meant when words are so fluid? Words change meaning all the time. What was once an acceptable word or song or phrase or whatever back in the day may be racist or inappropriate or mean something completely different these days. So, how the heck am I supposed to know what the heck this poem is talking about? Now, a deconstructionist doesn't think that things are meaningless. They just believe that meaning is nearly impossible to arrive at because of the fluid nature of words. So, that being said, let's take a look at these three poems. And the first poem we have is our favorite, Red Wheelbarrow. So, in this poem, it says, so much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. Now, when you're doing a deconstruction approach, it's a good idea to start with a basis, start with a formalist approach to get what you think is the intended meaning of the poem out of the way. Once you have what you think is the intended meaning of the poem, then you can start to pick it apart and show how the intended meaning falls apart and how basically the poem doesn't seem to be suggesting what the intention is. With that being said, we talked about in formalism that the potentially intended meaning of this particular poem was to talk about the importance of agriculture, the importance of farming upon American society. But if we actually look at these words, is it really saying that? And I apologize if I look over here. I took some notes and I just want to make sure that I cover everything that I wrote. So we have here in the very first line that it says, so much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. So right off the bat, the author is telling us that there's so much dependency on these things. But look at these images. The red wheelbarrow is glazed with rainwater. Nobody's around it. Nobody's using it. There's no mention of how used the wheelbarrow is. So how much are we depending on it actually? I can't even tell because I have no idea the wear and tear on this wheelbarrow. I do know that it's glazed with rainwater, which means that at the very least it's been sitting out during a rainstorm. So why wasn't it used then? I thought it was so important. I thought so much depended on it. But yet if so much is depending on it, why is it sitting there? And for that matter, what makes it important? Why are these chickens beside it? Why is a wheelbarrow and chickens so important? If we're meant to be looking at a farm, then why chickens? Why a wheelbarrow? Why not a barn or a tractor or something a little bit more farm specific? I mean, construction workers use wheelbarrows. So right off the bat, I'm not getting a clear sense of the importance. And that leads me to one of the most important terms that I forgot. I should have led with this. One of the most important terms in a deconstruction approach is to talk about the binaries, the opposites. What is the poem championing, and what's the opposite of that? So the poem seems to be championing importance. It says so much depends upon. So clearly there's some sort of level of importance. So what's the opposite of importance? Well, unimportance. So what you want to do with the deconstruction is you want to point out how the poem attempts to express the binary that it's going for, in this case, importance, and then you want to flip that and show how it's actually showing unimportance, which is what I'm doing in this case, talking about how the wheelbarrow and the chickens are basically sitting there, not doing anything, being unused. That's not really expressing importance. And then if we do a deeper dive into this, why are we separating words out? A red wheelbarrow. Well, a wheelbarrow is a single word, but the author has taken it upon himself to separate this word. So what is it saying? So much depends upon a red wheel? Are we meant to assume that the wheel on this wheelbarrow is red and not the wheelbarrow itself? Is that what we're meant to assume? Are we meant to assume that what's actually important about this wheelbarrow is the wheel itself? The meaning is unclear. I don't know. I don't know why we separate the wheelbarrow from the glazed with rainwater line. Are we suggesting that these pieces by themselves are what's important? That so much depends upon each piece individually? Well, if you do a little bit of reading on the author, which is totally acceptable in a deconstruction, you learn that William Carlos Williams was all about this movement in poetry where they attempted to create images with words. They created imagery poetry. So I know, just based on the style of poet he was, that he often was attempting to create images. But if he's attempting to create an image here, then why separate the wheel from the barrow? And then why separate that from the rainwater that he says that it's glazed with? If you're attempting to create a cohesive image, it doesn't make sense to split the pieces apart. Isn't that kind of like painting a picture, but instead of painting the picture and showing someone a completed picture, just giving them a blank canvas and giving them the individual pieces of paint and saying, here's a picture of a barn? I mean, that's like the IKEA approach, I guess, to painting. I mean, I don't know. That's confusing to me. And then you have these chickens, and again, why? What are they doing there? And it says, beside the white chickens. Why separate white from chickens? Are we meant to assume that the color white is important in some way? Chickens are white, so why separate that? Why are you trying to draw attention to the word white? Are we meant to assume that this is some sort of racial commentary? And if that's the case, then to say that so much depends upon the white chickens seems kind of racist to me. Is that the point that we're trying to get here? I mean, I'm confused. So do you see how you can kind of keep digging the hole deeper with deconstruction? Let's move on to the next poem, and I'll try to go a little faster on these next two. So in metaphors, the binary here is, well, if we do a formalist approach, again, we said that this poem is probably about pregnancy, okay, probably about an unwanted pregnancy. So she's trying to paint us this picture about this woman who's really unhappy with the pregnancy. So it seems like the binary here is between want and unwant, between what is desired and what is not. Okay, so it seems like this poem is saying that this baby is undesired. That seems to be what the intent was. But is it really showing that this is undesired? First of all, this entire poem is dedicated to this baby. If we're going, well, this is, of course, assuming, and by no means correctly, that that this is a poem about pregnancy. For all we know, it may not be. I mean, these are very confusing metaphors. But we went with that with our formalist approach, so let's keep going. So assuming that this poem is about pregnancy, if this pregnancy is unwanted, undesired, why does she spend literally the entire poem talking about it? If you don't want the thing, if that thing is unimportant to you, then why dedicate the entire document to it? That's confusing to me. Also, keep in mind that if you look at these different metaphors, if the baby is in fact the thing that is undesired, why are every single one of these metaphors attacking the mother herself? She says that the baby is the thing that's undesired, but she's insulting herself. Never once is she insulting the baby. She calls herself a means, a cow, a ponderous house, an elephant, a melon on two tendrils. The metaphors that she uses to describe the baby are all actually positive. She calls it a loaf of bread. She calls it money being minted. All of the negative imagery is for herself. It seems odd that if this is an undesired baby, that she would spend the entire poem criticizing herself, and the only references to the baby are in praise of it. Seems odd and awfully confusing. Then, if you look at the words more closely, look at the very first line. She tells us that this is a riddle. Well, a riddle is a puzzle. It's a game. It's a thing meant to be solved. So it seems like she wants us to solve these metaphors, that she's put these metaphors in here as a puzzle to be solved. And we did that with our formalist approach. But if this is such a negative experience for her, if this is such a bad thing for her, why turn it into a game? Games are meant to be fun. Games are meant to be enjoyed. I'm confused by the difference here in the tone that she is attempting to claim versus the tone that she is establishing. The tone she's attempting to claim is one of depression and anxiety and dread at this unwanted pregnancy, yet the tone that she's creating by giving us a game and only criticizing herself is one of whimsy, in fact. So, again, totally confused. So her meaning is unclear. And for that matter, what is she wanting us to figure out? Is she wanting us to figure out that she's pregnant? Is that the riddle that we're meant to solve? That these metaphors are all leading us to say, aha, she's pregnant. Well, good for her. I mean, why? Why have us solve that? Why not just say, hey guys, I'm pregnant and I don't like it? Like, why turn it into a game? There's seemingly no reason to do that. So again, confusion. Anyway, then we move on to I Felt a Funeral in My Brain. Now this one's pretty easy to figure out the binaries, okay? Right off the bat, in the title, she says funeral. And the whole poem, when we did a formalist approach of this poem, the whole time we were saying that she's basically feeling death, that there's some sort of death going on. Now in a formalist approach, we said that this death was mental, that maybe she was going insane. But in either case, death seems to be the prevailing theme going on here. So what's the opposite of death? Well, life, right? So let's look at it that way. So if the poem is suggesting that she's dead, well, then I have several questions. First of all, she says funeral. Well, funerals are for dead people. right? I mean, you don't have a funeral if you're still alive. So I can't assume that she's still alive because she literally says she's dead. She has a funeral. Yet if she's dead, how is she feeling anything? How can you feel a funeral in your brain if you're already dead? And for that matter, how is she aware of or seeing these mourners? How is she feeling them treading? And if we are to assume that this is all happening mentally, then why use the word funeral? Funeral is a final resting place. Why not say, I felt a pain in my brain or something like that? And if this is all meant to be mental, then how are these things moving in her brain? And then she has other references to death in here to further illustrate the intended meaning of death, where she has funeral, she has a box that we, based on the word funeral, are assuming, although maybe incorrectly, that this box is a coffin, although we don't know for certain. She mentions heaven. Okay, she has all these references to death, but again, how is she aware of all of these things going on? How does she have her senses to be aware or cognizant? If she's not meaning literally dead, if maybe she's meaning figuratively dead, well, then she must be talking about a part of her. Well, what part of her is figuratively dead? And how are we to know that? Are we talking about her brain? If she's going brain dead, then how is she aware enough to make these observations about the mourners and, get really abstract with this idea about being an ear and, all of this stuff? So how are we able to take her word for it that she's going brain dead, figuratively, if she's able to make these deep and complex seemingly deep and complex metaphors? So, and then we have all of these random dashes and capitalizations. Now, if we were to do some deep dive into Emily Dickinson herself, we would learn that critics have been arguing about what these dashes and capitalizations mean for years. And they still don't have definitive answers as to what these mean. So if experts can't figure out what these dashes and capitalizations mean, how am I supposed to? I'm no expert by any means. You're no expert by any means. So how are we supposed to know what these dashes and capitalizations are for? Are they by accident? Are they on purpose? If they're by accident, then so be it. But if they're on purpose and she put them in there for a reason, then are we to assume that in order to really understand the full depth and complexity of this poem, that we are supposed to know what these dashes and capitalizations represent? Since we can't know that, how are we ever supposed to get to the full meaning of this poem? Maybe, and we talked about this in our formalist approach, that these dashes and capitalizations are supposed to represent her fractured state of mind, but again, we can't be sure about that. And again, that leads us back to the initial problem with this, which is if she has a fractured state of mind, that's a whole different ballgame than being mind dead. Fractured alludes that there's still a part that's alive. Maybe confused, but it's still alive. That's a fully different ballgame from a funeral in her brain, which would imply brain dead. So it doesn't add up, is what I'm trying to say. And that's pretty much the gist of a deconstruction approach, is that what you're saying is this is the intended meaning of the poem. As far as I can gather, this is what the author intended it to mean. But based on the words that they used, based on the way that they wrote it, I can't be sure that that's the actual meaning. And all I can do is say that the intended meaning is unclear. That's the best I can hope for. because words are fluid and I don't know the poet personally, so I don't know what they mean. I don't know. I can just take my best guess. And that's deconstruction.